What's up, Junas? Curious? Surely when you don't understand how something works or you don't know why things happen, you just ask questions. From normal questions like why does height make us dizzy, to slightly more interesting questions like, for example, how does a pregnancy test work? Well, Mr. Curiosities, some subscribers are always asking questions and some are so interesting that I bring them to this video. For this and much more, these are 20 curious questions in 10 minutes. Edu Palacio asks, what is dopamine and what is its function? To understand what dopamine is, we need to know that our brain has neurotransmitters, a kind of chemical messenger that neurons use to communicate with each other. Dopamine is one of those messengers and it has several very important functions. To begin with, it is responsible for pleasurable sensations and relaxation, which is why it is known as the happiness hormone. But in addition, it is key for regulating motor reactions. For example, to protect ourselves from danger, motivate us to face challenges, or manage our memories. Nicolas Peluso asks, how does a pregnancy test work? Thanks to advances in technology, we can now have more information and know everything much earlier. In the case of pregnancies, we need to know that classic pregnancy tests, which react with urine, are designed to look for a hormone in our pee called human chorionic gonadotropin. Human chorionic gonadotropin, a hormone that is only produced by our body if we are pregnant. Since human chorionic gonadotropin is released when a fertilized egg attaches to the lining of the uterus at the start of pregnancy. Did you know that, my friend? Junistrella asks, how does wireless charging work? Nowadays, we can use our cell phones for practically everything, from communicating to studying or working. But for that, we need it to have battery, and with wireless charging, we can make sure it's always at 100%. This technology works thanks to two electromagnetic induction coils, one that's in the smartphone and the other in the charger. And only then, when the two coils get close to each other, from the charging base, a flow of electrons is activated, which starts to circulate through a magnetic field toward the phone's battery, which ends up charging it. Slat07 asks, why? When we jump from a great height, do we shout Geronimo? Is this shout to give us courage while we jump from a great height? It's very popular, and to understand how it became so well known, we should travel back to the 1940s. At that time, the 501st Regiment of the United States Army was preparing to jump for the first time in Paraguay. And to calm their nerves a bit, the soldiers went to the movies the day before, and by chance they chose to watch Geronimo, a film about the life of an Apache chief who at one point jumped into a river from a rock shouting his own name. The paratroopers decided to imitate him, and that's how it became history. Karen Galvez Mendoza asks, why is sweat salty? Surely at some point you've wondered why sweat tastes salty, and to understand the reason, we need to know that this liquid our body expels is essential to keep us cool. Every time our body temperature rises, the sweat glands under our skin start to produce that substance which, besides containing water, is also made up of a mineral called sodium chloride, in other words, salt. And it's thanks to the presence of salt and other minerals, the water it contains. Sweat evaporates quickly, which helps reduce the surface heat of the body. Drancer Gamer asks, what was the first toy in the McDonald's Happy Meal? One of McDonald's star products is the Happy Meal. Since its creation in the 1970s, they have offered all kinds of toys that the youngest customers love to have. If you're curious about the first collection in history, you might be surprised they were quite simple items. For example, kids could find a plastic bracelet that looked like a watch, which was used to store coins called McCrease, or more common things like a puzzle, an eraser, or simply a spinning top. Thank you so much, Ronald McDonald Orby Mendoza. Why do we feel dizzy when we're at a high altitude? A large number of people feel uncomfortable at certain heights. You might know that uneasy stomach feeling and intense fear of falling when passing through a high place. Feeling vertigo is actually quite common, but it doesn't have just one cause. This reaction can appear for some physical reason, for example, a condition of the ears or the cervical vertebrae, which makes us feel dizzy or even faint in that situation. But obviously, vertigo can also be caused by our own fears and more psychological issues. Jonas Uniga asks, how was music recorded on a cassette? In the 1980s, the cassette was one of the most popular media for recording and playing sound, and inside a plastic case we find the secret of how it works. A pair of metal heads through which a magnetic tape passes. This tape had areas with pre-recorded codes that were converted into electrical signals thanks to the rotating heads. Finally, those electrical signals were decoded by the music playback devices and converted into sounds by the amplifiers. Yo Soy Fantoni asks, how does the umbilical cord of babies work, and why don't they need oxygen? While the baby is developing inside the mother's womb, it needs to be nourished and breathe, but its organs are not yet ready to do so. That's why the placenta provides the baby with oxygen and nutrients through the umbilical cord. This cord is made up of arteries and veins that allow the exchange of nutrients and oxygenated blood. At the same time, it carries away the waste products from the developing body. In other words, the placenta acts as the lungs throughout the entire pregnancy. So while the baby is inside the womb, it doesn't need to use its lungs to breathe or its digestive system to feed. How amazing, Mother Nature. Daniel Carabajal asks, why was salt used as payment in ancient times? If we think about common cooking ingredients, table salt surely comes to mind. But a few centuries ago, this seasoning had a very different value, since it was a means of payment, just like any currency today. In the ancient civilizations of China, Egypt, Greece, or the Roman Empire, salt was a very valuable resource that was traded in the form of cubes, similar to bars of soap, or also in bars. This mineral had many uses, not only in the kitchen, but also outside of it. For example, for food preservation, the making of medicines, and even as a raw material in some funeral rites. Luis Maridueña asks, why do some men have a lot of hair and beard while others don't? Maybe you've wondered why some men have a lot of facial and head hair while others don't have as much. Well, we find the answer to this in a tiny section of the skin called the hair follicle. Every human being has hundreds of thousands of follicles on the epidermis, and it's in these tiny spots where hair grows. But some people simply have a greater number of follicles than others, for various genetic and hormonal reasons, resulting in more or less facial hair. Jose Rubalcaba asks, how does cold welding work? Although it may seem strange, it is possible to join and fix two solid materials without melting them using heat. This process is known as cold welding and can occur in nature, for example, in the formation of gold nuggets. If we want to weld using cold welding, we can do it in two ways. The first way is with machines that apply a lot of pressure to the pieces we want to join until the atoms bond together. And the second way is much more well-known and requires using specific chemicals that are capable of bonding the pieces to be welded. Juan Mojica asks, where and when was the first security camera installed? The first security camera was used by the German Army in 1942. This surveillance system, known as closed-circuit television, had very basic technology and was in black and white. Mainly, it was used for observing missile tests for long-distance military attacks, and this first camera needed constant supervision by a person to operate, since videotapes that allowed recording images did not exist yet. Camacho Rosas, Kevin asks, when a new brand of dog food with better flavor comes out, who tests it? We can assume that the flavors of dog food are tested among the animals to check how much they like them or not. And this is the case since there are tasting dogs that try different varieties of balanced food. But in addition, there are also people who do that job. They are skilled professionals ready to assess the quality and features of balanced food, including aroma and nutrition. That's why they not only smell the food but also taste it, although they spit it out without swallowing it. That really is strange. Johnny Rodrigo de Cozumel Alonso asks, how is porcelain made? Porcelain has been produced for centuries, but for a long time, the formula for making it was kept secret. This material can be created either by hand or industrially from four main powdered ingredients: clay, kaolin, quartz, and feldspar. After working with this substance, it undergoes several firings until the mass becomes very strong and waterproof. And finally, in the glazing stage, decoration is applied using different pigments or precious metals. Noe Hernandez asks, how is it measured accurately? At how many feet of altitude does a plane smell? The altitude at which a plane smells is a fundamental piece of information that the pilot must know. To maneuver the aircraft safely and to know the altitude precisely, a very important instrument called an altimeter is used. This device can indicate the height at which a point is located with respect to sea level through a mechanical system that measures atmospheric pressure, thanks to a capsule that contracts or expands according to the pressure. Then, the movement of that capsule is reflected in a system of needles that show how many feet high the plane is. Edwin Alejandro Galeano Diaz asks, why does hair only grow in certain parts of the body? Recently, researchers from the University of Pennsylvania found the answer to this question. According to these scientists, in certain areas of the body, we have a special type of protein that blocks the cellular channels responsible for hair growth. Their research suggests that certain animals evolved to produce the protein in specific areas to better adapt to their environment. And, for example, in our case, having hairless hands is more useful for holding tools or for other tasks. Wilkin asks, why does the body move out of nowhere when we're sleeping? Hypnic jerks are the muscle spasms or twitches we have during sleep. These phenomena are sudden and involuntary muscle movements that can be explained by a simple reason. When we rest, our brain reduces its control over the motor system, and if we wake up for any reason before falling asleep deeply, the control over our muscles is suddenly reactivated, which produces that brief jerk. How interesting the human body is. Videopolis Television asks, in what years was electrical energy invented? For many years, different tests and experiments were carried out until the invention of electrical energy. And if we talk about people, the American Thomas Alva Edison is considered the official creator of durable, cheap, and safe electric light, since he was the first to design a system that consumed a reasonable amount of energy while withstanding use without being too expensive. And it is believed that it was on October 22, 1879 that this inventor managed to power an incandescent bulb with electricity for the first time. Luis Gonzalez asks, where does so much water come from in a tsunami? We know that earthquakes can happen underwater, and if they are very strong, they can cause the seabed to move in a very abrupt way. This phenomenon causes a large mass of water to be suddenly pushed, producing incredibly powerful waves as the ocean tries to regain its lost balance. This type of wave moves a much larger amount of water than those produced by the wind and can travel enormous distances without even losing energy.